All right. The administration hit the ground running with infrastructure plans for bold action and immediate relief for American families as the country grapples with converging crises. We know that the American Rescue Plan was passed very quickly, but that its provisions are temporary. And we're continuing with the American Jobs and American Families Plan. Those negotiations are in high gear, ramping up. The Made in America tax plan is actually integrated into those other two plans. And behind the scenes, there's very important executive order activity going on. Now, I just want to take a second to review what we mean by infrastructure. Here it is by categories. And I'm not going to read all of this, but we're talking about physical infrastructure, human infrastructure, and how to pay for all of it. And in each case, when we get into the bipartisan negotiations, I think the sense many of us have is that climate change mitigation is still a problem for many Republicans, as is climate justice. And the preference is resonating with that voice we heard at the beginning, a voice that says we shouldn't even have the EPA. There is no climate change. And I think that that is still a big problem for many, but not all, within the Republican Party. All right. The Biden-Harris administration started with plans, and now they're becoming legislative proposals. The American Jobs Plan, the Innovation and Competition Act has already passed the Senate. That was a major component of the American Jobs Plan too, but you'll see the word China there, and I'll return to that in a second. Then we have the Invest in America Act, focusing more on physical infrastructure and climate, and the House has passed that, and that's waiting for reconciliation with the Senate. Then we have the bipartisan framework, which the White House has green-lighted, and we all know we're seeing day in and day out developments on that front. We have the American Families Plan, with a focus more on human infrastructure and climate justice. Here, it seems as though the reconciliation budget resolution is going to have to step forward and cover most of that, because most of that has been left out of the bipartisan framework. Then we are focusing more and more attention on the Thrive Act. It asserts Black, Indigenous, and people of color are hurt most and benefit least from conventional approaches. Their expertise, their experience is necessary for all of us to benefit. The Congressional Progressive Caucus has endorsed it, and it has been referred to various committees in the House and to one in the Senate, where it is not receiving much attention right now, but it is going to receive attention from us more today. All right. I'm not going to spend a lot of time with this, but all of the plans require tax provisions, and that is a big bugaboo for the Republicans, in part because it requires making our tax system fairer and something that can address the crises that we are facing right now to the scale at which they exist. So you'll see here, AFP is American Families Plan, and it calls for raising, increasing, and making permanent many of the things that are in the American Rescue Plan. And that is a subject of hot debate in the Senate right now. For income tax, for individual income tax credits, also for capital gains and dividend taxes, for corporate income taxes. And I'll just highlight a couple of things here. You can see under income tax, corporate income tax, that American Jobs Plan, AJP, proposal to increase the rate to 28%, still lower than the 35% where it was. And that is something that has been jettisoned by the bipartisan framework. And the ideal for the Republican participants is to jettison as much of this as possible. All right. And we also have tax provisions for pass-through business taxes, business tax credits, and international taxes. The presentation we're offering today is something that is going to be available. You'll see it in a Facebook post tomorrow, and on our proDA Facebook page. And right now we're highlighting, summarizing, and preparing for the discussion we'll get to when we have finished our presentations. So here the plans are by the numbers. You know, the American Jobs Plan originally was slated to be a $2.3 trillion plan. You can see the bipartisan infrastructure, cut it in half, and actually there's only $579 billion of new spending, which is far less than the military budget annually right now, which, by the way, it looks as though will be increased by an additional $25 billion. And then we have the Innovation and Competition Act, Bipartisan Framework, Invest in America Act. All of that doesn't reach $2.3 trillion. We have the American Families Plan proposal at $1.8 trillion. The budget reconciliation proposal is something that is likely going to try to recoup many of the things that are lost in bipartisan negotiations. There we have the Thrive Act with the proposed $1 trillion expenditure per year for the next decade, and the Made in America tax plan, which is perceived to accumulate over $2 trillion in the next 15 years. So let's take a look at them in comparison just briefly. The legislation associated with the American Jobs Plan comes in at $300 billion less currently. The R&D portion of the American Jobs Plan was for climate change, but the act that has been passed in the Senate focuses not on climate change, but on competition with China. And the legislation in the bipartisan framework focuses less on human infrastructure and climate change and tries to exclusively focus on physical infrastructure. With the American Families Plan, we have the reconciliation budget proposal trying to include more of that and include what is lost in the bipartisan framework as far as climate change and climate justice is concerned. And once again, we have the Thrive Act, which would be an all-inclusive and also focusing on climate justice proposal with $1 trillion of spending over the next decade. All right, that's enough of the framework for all of this. Now we're going to turn to Alexander Lee, who's going to talk to us more about the bipartisan infrastructure framework. Take it away, Alexander.
Okay, I'll be brief. You can hear me and see me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Beautiful bridge. The lead article in my local newspaper, the Boston Globe, over the last day has been about infrastructure, about how Boston was built on fill and has inadequate resources to take away stormwater. And we've seen that in China this week. We've seen in Germany the impacts of climate change or strange weather events on infrastructure. And so one of the things that the Biden administration and the people who came up with the framework want to emphasize is that it's sustainable, resilient, and just. Next slide. So Bruce already sort of mentioned, and this slide isn't ideal for seeing the figures, but it's a $1.2 trillion bipartisan infrastructure framework, and it. I think what's important to mention is, because he compared it to the military budget, is that actually this is over a 10-year period that this money is getting spent. So it's sort of an apples to oranges comparison with the military budget. The plan makes transformational and historic investments in clean transportation infrastructure. in clean water infrastructure. Pete Buttigieg is doing a roadshow, and he is talking about how we don't need gold-plated pipes. We just need to get the lead out of our pipes. So it's sort of astonishing that as the most advanced democracy in the world, we are still trying to fix that problem. And so a lot of the physical infrastructure stuff needs to happen. And so if that can pass, and then the rest of this can happen in bits and pieces or in the reconciliation bill, that will be good. But neither the Biden plan nor the agreement that they are sort of working on, or and I'll talk more about that in a second, the bipartisan infrastructure framework, is radical enough in the view of many conservationists and environmentalists to accomplish what we need to accomplish to stave off a radically different future for humanity. So it's really an existential question of whether we can pass this stuff. Clean power infrastructure, remediation of legacy pollution, resilience to the changing climate. I'll be taking questions later about any of the small parts of this. If we can go to the next slide. This is a better view of what was off to the side, so you can maybe see these figures. There's a lot to cram in on one slide, but this is the new spending, and you can see that that the largest is for roads, bridges, and major projects, and then for power infrastructure in the other infrastructure section, so that we don't see what happened in Portland with melting wires, and so that we can build distributed generation, solar, wind, other renewables, and get it to where people live without a lot of line loss. I don't think there's anything else to comment on here at the moment. Next slide. So this is a cost comparison. So when these slides are sent out, you'll be able to see the cost comparison between what Biden proposed and what the infrastructure framework laid out. But the infrastructure framework, since I put these slides together, has seen a preliminary vote in the Senate where it did not advance, but there will be a vote for cloture tomorrow or Tuesday, Monday or Tuesday in the U.S. Senate. So maybe there'll be another crack at this. So about 2/3 of the resources that the president proposed are in this new plan. Next slide. So the framework will generate significant economic benefits and returns. It's financed through a combination of closing the tax gap, and that was the big sticky point this week. So that was part of the framework, but it doesn't look like the IRS or the Department of Treasury is going to get, and the Justice Department is going to get the teeth to go after the billions and billions of dollars of unpaid taxes that would help to fund this. Redirecting unspent emergency relief funds from COVID-19 and other natural disasters, targeted corporate user fees, and the macroeconomic impact of infrastructure investment. In other words, if you invest in infrastructure, it helps to build your economy and you earn it back, which is the traditional view of how economics works. And then next slide. So these are the list of the proposed financing sources. I just talked about one of them, which is number 4. If we can go to the next slide, I think I'm running out of time here. I don't want to take up more than my time. So the question, I think, is do we make sausage with whatever the Republicans will be willing to accept, or do we take a big nothing burger? Like, we cannot afford to not act on the physical infrastructure part. Of course, we cannot afford to not to act on the human infrastructure part, which is really what Biden and his administration are pushing, that has been pushed to the side by the Republicans. I think that something needs to come out of this. And so when we talk about calls to action, I think, we can ask for things to be bigger than they are right now. But we want to be clear that something needs to pass. That's my opinion. And so this is just a quote from a prominent conservation organization that works on biological diversity. The industry-friendly infrastructure plan squanders one of our last best chances. Instead of a Marshall Plan approach, it moves our to renewable energy. It includes gimmicky subsidies for carbon capture. Fantastically wishes the free market will save us, and fails to take crucial and ambitious steps towards phasing out fossil fuels. That's one Al Jazeera article that quoted a prominent government affairs director for a well-known conservation group. Let's go to the next slide. And then 350 sort of echoed that in their comments, that they think that the carbon capture stuff is not significant enough. And so I know I've focused my remarks mostly on the climate aspects of this. They are first and foremost what are on my mind, not just because within DA I'm working on trying to get a environment and climate crisis council started, but also because this is something I've worked on since 8th grade, when I tried to create the greenhouse effect in a Coca-Cola bottle in 1988. Let's move on to the last slide, or the next slide. Yep. And let's Sue go ahead.
All right, thank you very much, Alexander. That was the bipartisan infrastructure framework, which is being negotiated in the Senate right now. And at the same time, we have the Invest in America Act. And Sue Alksness will talk about what's going on with that in the House.
Okay, so let me get my timer started here. Give me a minute. All right. Yeah, so first I want to start out by thanking Bruce for doing a lot of the work on putting this presentation together, and very grateful to that. So so the Invest in America Act has passed in the House. It came out of the House Committee on Transportation, headed by Rep. DeFazio, and it has $547 billion in spending foreseen, works on modernizing roads, bridges, a lot of investment in transit, looks at drinking water, wastewater, and it includes a lot of local investment. And it passed the House July 1st, and we don't know if it's going to be reconciled with the bipartisan framework. The next slide shows the breakdown of funding in the area of roads, bridges, and safety. So I won't go through all of these items, but I will emphasize that there is some focus on like climate resilient construction. Unlike the bipartisan framework, like just a lot more looking at resiliency and addressing that. What we don't see is the level of investment that you'll hear from in the Thrive Act that Angela will talk about later. And there's a really some good investment, obviously, not what we need, but some good investment in transit. and it including access for rural communities, communities facing persistent poverty, some like reduced fare pilot program, and trying to get more compliance with the Americans with Disabilities Act, so that everybody can get where they need to. And there are transit deserts in America, of course, so it attempts to address those and improve accessibility in those areas. And specifically in the area of passenger and freight rail, there's spending, tripling the funding for Amtrak, and trying to get some high-speed rail. Okay, so where do things stand? So the Senate passed the bipartisan framework. Now we don't know what the House is going to do. Sorry, I'm trying to get my. I have notes on this slide, folks, and I can't get them to show. Why won't they show? Okay, hold on one sec. There they are. Thank goodness. Okay. Yeah. So so we don't know what's going to happen with the Invest in America Act, if it'll get in, like, somehow if it's just going to fade away and we're just going to be stuck with what's in the bipartisan framework. And the Senate could attempt to pass the amended House bill, but of course, the Republicans in the Senate will likely resist what's in there. What the DeFazio and others are working hard to try to get the elements of the Invest in America Act addressed in the Senate, and to try to advocate for them. So he's written to Schumer and Pelosi. This is fascinating to me, like asking for the ability for House members to be able to advocate for the bill when there are bicameral deliberations. Like, to me, that's just like, I guess, yeah, that's just really disappointing to me that that's the kind of thing that people have to ask for when they spent, they had bipartisan meetings with over 70 stakeholder groups to develop the Invest in America Act, bipartisan meetings with over 70 stakeholder groups, more than 20 committee hearings, and they incorporated over 300 amendments. And the bill contains, for better or worse, I mean, hopefully these are all quality projects, 1,500 member designated projects which were requested by both Republicans and Democrats. I think what's the Invest in America Act has a lot of the climate oriented work that needs to happen, and much of it is missing from the bipartisan bill. It just doesn't deal significantly with with climate change, also with some of the social equity in the transit deserts, and trying to. There's also some effort in the Invest in America Act to reconnect communities that were split by freeways. So, yeah, I think that's pretty much what I have to share on the Invest in America Act.
Thank you very much, Sue. If I summarize now, the claim might be that the bipartisan framework currently is the least adequate, focusing on physical infrastructure and not focusing enough either on climate mitigation or climate justice. The Invest in America Act, with the Representative DeFazio working hard on behalf of it, asserts that it can recover some of what the bipartisan framework lacks, and however, it too is focused primarily on physical infrastructure, not exclusively, but to a large extent. And that brings us to the reconciliation budget resolution, which we might perceive as something like a big container, and more things are going into that container, or people are hoping that that can be the case, as we realize that neither the bipartisan framework nor the Invest in America Act really covers everything that was proposed in the jobs plan and family plan by the Biden-Harris administration. So we have the Senate Budget Committee Chair, Senator Sanders, leading this effort. He's collaborating very closely with President Biden, Senate Majority Leader Schumer, and they're trying to craft a comprehensive physical, human infrastructure and climate mitigation, climate justice legislation package that includes everything from the American Jobs Plan and the American Families Plan that is not in the bipartisan framework and also not covered by the Invest in America plan. It foresees currently $3.5 trillion of spending, again, over a 10-year period. By the way, if we took the military budget at its current levels and spread that over 10 years, that would be $7.5 trillion of spending over a decade, likely more. So the reconciliation budget resolution is linked now very closely to the bipartisan framework in what we often hear as that dual track approach. I won't read all of this, but you can see that the physical infrastructure components are many, and something that has been lost in other plans and other legislative proposals that comes back in here is the clean electricity standard, which is necessary to ensure that we reach something like carbon greenhouse gas neutrality just in the energy sector by 2030 or 2035. And an interesting point here, the Senate committee that would be most responsible for the clean electricity standard is the one that is led by Senator Manchin from West Virginia right now. And that's creating an interesting kind of dynamic in the negotiations. All right. At the very end of this list, too, we see something called the Green New Deal for Schools, which has just been introduced by Representative Jamal Bowman. And it is a physical infrastructure project to try to bring schools across the United States, urban, rural, everywhere, up to the standards we need to be environmentally climate smart by the end of this decade. And he and others in the our progressive group are striving to have that become a part of this huge reconciliation budget proposal also. Then we can see various categories for human infrastructure. We haven't talked much about that at all. It's there in the American Families Plan, but it's not there in a very big way in any of the other legislative proposals. So we have healthcare, family, labor, education, which some things that are extremely important, and among those are what you hear more and more frequently concerning Medicare expansion, eye, dental, and hearing care, with the possibility, although it requires a lot of effort if that's going to happen, to lower the eligibility age to 60. All right. I'm not going to focus anymore on this right now. We can return to it when we discuss the reconciliation budget proposal. And the funding for it acknowledges the need to correct income inequality. Here's a graph where you can see that the annual growth by percentile over 1980 to 2014 creates a possibility for people increasing their economic strength. But you can see an average adult line there, and everyone in the 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, all the way up to the 80th, 85th percentile is below the average. And it's only when you get to the 90, 95th up to 99.9% wealthiest people in the United States that their income growth has really increased exponentially. That's just one of those graphs you can see that indicates we have a problem with income inequality in the United States. So we have the Made in American tax plan provisions we saw in earlier slides. There also are progressive legislative proposals. Senator Sanders has the Medicare Drug Price Negotiation Act to lower drug prices. Senator Warren, the Ultra Millionaire Tax Act. Representative Khanna, the Cheaters Act, which is another bill designed to make sure that we reduce that IRS tax collection gap. And most recently, there's also been a Democratic proposal to introduce a border carbon tax to make sure that countries around the world who are not doing their part to reduce carbon emissions are taxed when they import goods into the United States. All right, what are the next steps? And here, one could ask, have we learned our Affordable Care Action Act lesson from 2009? Remember that during the August recess, the Republican senators went home, held town hall meetings, and it became a part of diluting the Affordable Care Act and also dragging feet so that it took much longer to pass. It could be that there will be a blueprint Senate vote. It was supposed to be in July, but now it's postponed until August. The Senate recess is scheduled from the 7th of August to the 12th of September, over 1 month. Senate Leader Schumer may decide to shorten that or cancel it, and I think we might want to have something to say about that. And at the same time, there are progressive organizations, including the Sierra Club, kicking off a collective summer of action, and the National Nurses United, who are saying that it's time for us to go out onto the streets to write our representatives and make sure that there is Medicare expansion. All right, now we'll continue with the Thrive Act. And Angela, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Bruce, for inviting me. And the Thrive Act is what Thrive actually stands for is transform, heal, and renew by investing in a vibrant economy. And I think that's a really great name. It was inspired by the Green New Deal and initially introduced by Deb Harlan, who's now the Interior Secretary. It was reintroduced for this session of Congress on April 29th. And it wants to invest $1 trillion for the next decade. And it will create 15 million jobs and hopefully achieve full employment. Next slide, please. So, as I said, it authorizes $1 trillion for the next 10 years, which is probably not enough money, but we definitely, we need this. Our infrastructure is crumbling. It also honors the frontline leadership. That's what they're calling Black, people of color, and Indigenous people, people that are on the front lines of climate justice. And it invests in the whole economy to combat injustice, pollution, and joblessness. It also, there's a big section about respecting Indigenous sovereignty, which we'll talk about a little bit later. And they want to have at least 50% of investments for these frontline communities, which is a really great way to combat joblessness while at the same time providing climate justice. Next slide, please. So honoring the frontline leadership. So they want to create a Thrive board with this legislation from impacted communities, unions, Indigenous people, and to guide the investments for the next 10 years. And this board, if it works out, will be a great way to get communities and community leaders involved in where they make investments so that we can reorient these investments towards justice. Next slide, please. This is one of the really amazing parts for me of this legislation, the number of jobs that are actually being created and in all the areas. I believe that they estimate it's going to be 15.5 million new jobs, and they're broken down in a lot of different areas, which I will not read to you. You can just take a look at the slide yourself. If we could have this type of investment in our nation, we'd have a completely different nation at the end of 10 years. We would actually be back up at the top of a developed nation instead of being kind of at the bottom. If you look around, if you're interested in infrastructure projects, there are huge infrastructure projects and energy and climate related projects going on all around the world, but they're not taking place in the United States. And this is something that we really have to change because time is running out. Next slide, please. So respecting Indigenous sovereignty is really important, and it's something that the US government has failed to do up until today. Like we still don't respect the sovereignty of our Indigenous nations. So this would make the tribes have to have formed consent for all the investments that are affecting them. So we wouldn't have something like the pipeline coming from Canada running through Indigenous land, because they would be able to say no, and then it wouldn't go any further. We wouldn't have to have people standing out being shot at and pepper sprayed and sprayed with water in the middle of winter. So I think this is a really good opportunity for us to turn the page on Indigenous relations. Next slide, please. And once again, that at least 50% for frontline communities. So these are the communities that have borne the brunt of systemic racism, environmental justice, economic exclusion, and it includes Black, Indigenous, Latinx, Arab, Asian, and Pacific Islander communities, but this also includes poor white communities that in states that like West Virginia, or some of the other ones where they have a lot of environmental damage from the fossil fuel industries that are taking place. Next slide. And the other really positive thing about this is that unions 100% support, or not, I'm not going to say 100%, a lot of unions support the Thrive Act, because this is creating jobs that are good jobs and with strong wages and benefits, access to union. And they're also going to try to ensure that women, African-American, Indigenous people, and people of color in general will get a large percentage of these jobs. So it's not just that we're going to have some really low paid jobs, but these are higher wage jobs that can support families. And right now we have so many people that are underemployed, if not unemployed, and we need to get everybody back to work and thriving. Next slide. So where do we go? This is your slide, isn't it? But I want to share one more thing in the chat. They've created this really nice website about the Thrive Act that has a lot of really good information. And I think it's really important that if you support this, that you write your senators and representatives. Right now, there are only 7 co-sponsors on the Thrive Act in the Senate, and there's 64 co-sponsors on the Thrive Act in the House. The bills are identical. I'll put the 2 bills out there if you want to take a look at them in the chat. But it's if you like to write your congressman, or even if you don't, this is the time, and tell them to support the Thrive Act, because it's really what we need to continue in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Angela. I agree that Thrive Agenda website is really, really good and has multiple entry points for people with different levels of interest. You can stay at the surface level, you can go way deep, and you can find opportunities for action. And by the way, the image here also comes from that Thrive Agenda page. I want to remind all of us that the presentation here includes a number of links. Everything that appears in that kind of golden color is a link to the much of the information here, and allows us to go deeper with all of the legislative proposals, with all of the plans, and also with some of the developments that have occurred during the last days and week or so. So that leaves us with some questions that I would like to use for our discussion. We have another half hour or so during which we can try to wrap our heads and everything around all that has been presented. And I imagine that there are at least 4 questions that all of us might have right now. One of them is, the Senate Majority Leader, the President, and many are claiming that we need to get this done now. And for the Democratic prospects in the midterm elections, but also because of that climate clock and the needs of millions of people, a lot of this should have happened a long time ago. And if it doesn't happen soon, one might claim that we could be right back listening to voices like that one we heard at the beginning in the Al Gore trailer. And time is really short to show that we can deliver and ensure people that our 2-party government system really works. So is dual track legislation, is it going to pass before the recess? Wow, the recess is coming up in just 2 weeks. And second question, will Senator Schumer shorten or cancel the August recess? Oh my goodness. The third question, will the reconciliation budget resolution, will it in the end include all of the jobs and family plan components? And to what extent will it embrace the Thrive Agenda? When all is said and done, the most important question is all of this going to be just enough, just in time? All right, I'm going to stop sharing my screen here, give you another few seconds to look at those questions, and then we're going to throw it open for some lively and uninhibited discussion.
All right, let's go. A lot of
Yes, Sue,
information there.
I'm going to put you on the spot. Sue, what do you think the chances of our passing the bipartisan bill and the reconciliation resolution budget proposal in the next 2 weeks?
In the next 2 weeks, I am totally not the person to make a prediction on that, Bruce. I don't know. There must be some folks on here who have their fingers more on the pulse than I do. I'm not feeling very optimistic today.
All right.
Maybe we need someone with a
I
little
think
more.
we'll know better by midweek, really.
Okay, thank you, Alexander.
I mean, because they're going to vote again to whether they're going to advance this thing, right? So we'll have a better sense. But it's already been whittled down, right? I have a distracting question about the culture wars. The man who took a really large phallus into outer space landed and gave $100 million to Van Jones, who was Obama's green jobs guy. And I think we could really message around that with Congress and the American people, because everyone's upset that Amazon is not treating its workers well and not paying its taxes. And so we should message around the fact that, why is the private sector giving $100 million, which is a drop in the bucket, to greenwash after the phallus landed? So anyway, I don't know. That's what I think we should be messaging around.
Well, yeah, I agree with you, but I think we should be more blunt. In his speech after he got back to Earth, or maybe it was before, he said, all Amazon customers and workers, this is, you paid for this. And I'm just like, yeah, now you got to pay your taxes, dude. We're not interested in your
Right.
in your pleasure trips.
They did
anymore.
pay for it with their blood and toil. Yeah.
Yeah, they did. And everybody that bought something from Amazon paid for it. And all we want is for him to pay his taxes. I mean, you know, nobody needs to ride a phallic shaped rocket to the exo space, you know?
Dana Powers chimed in with a chat comment. Dana, could you unmute and tell us what Adam Schiff had to say?
Yeah, I could. Let me just get it off my phone. I'm on a Signal group and we discuss these things all the time. So here it is. It's short, but it's to the point. He says, listen, I'm all for space exploration and it must have been an amazing view. But maybe,
Dana, we heard
We
you at the
can't-
beginning. We heard you at the beginning, but when you leaned in, we stopped hearing you.
okay, I never know exactly
You're
where.
perfect right there. Right there, you're
Okay,
perfect.
I'll not move then.
Yep.
Listen, I'm all for space exploration, and it must have been an amazing view. But maybe, and I'm just spitballing here, if Amazon and other companies paid their fair share in taxes, we could lift all kids, if not into space, at least out of poverty.
Yes.
So he doesn't discuss here the issue of paying his workers well, or even giving them decent quality jobs, not designed with built-in burnout. So voila, but it's a good little tweet.
Mhm.
Yes.
I want to suggest a scenario that brings into focus the urgency we have right now. The bipartisan framework, I think, is going to come up for another vote, which would allow it then to be debated and voted on relatively quickly. And let's assume that that is going to happen. And let's further assume that then there will be enough of the Republicans who have said that they are going to back it, who will vote in favor of it, so that we get 60 votes in favor of the bipartisan infrastructure framework, let's say by the 6th of August. That's going to likely mean that we'll have roughly $570, $80 billion of spending over the next, it may not even be 10 years, between 5 and 8 years, depending on how they frame it. And that's primarily for hard infrastructure and for the physical infrastructure, not so much for climate change, mitigation, or climate justice or human infrastructure. Then where does that leave us with the reconciliation budget proposal? With the understanding we want that to be done by the time the recess starts on the 9th. Linked to that, I will just want to ask, is Senator Schumer going to have the courage to say we're not going home until we get those 2 items finished?
I wish he would have the courage, but go ahead, Bruce.
Okay, yeah, I was just going to say that on the bipartisan deal, I'm kind of pessimistic on it. I saw somebody was talking about, Susan Collins was saying that she's she thinks that she can get 10 Republican votes for this, which is what they need to overcome a filibuster. And I'm sure she's very troubled about all this, as she is about everything. But but somebody else was calling these Republicans, because there's 5, as I understand it, as of now, that have signed on to the bipartisan deal. And somebody else was saying, well, there must be 5 other unicorn Republicans out there that will surely show up to vote for this. So I'm kind of pessimistic that the unicorns will come out. So I think the bipartisan deal is likely to go down. I mean, that's the strategy, and they're working through it. Also, I always think when they talk on the news about looking for 10 Republicans, always reminds me of the Bible story in Genesis where Abraham is negotiating with God about not destroying Sodom and Gomorrah. And God settles on, well, if you can find 10 righteous people in Sodom and Gomorrah, I won't destroy it. So they're looking for their 10 righteous Republicans on this one. And I'm kind of pessimistic that they'll find them. On the big deal, on the reconciliation thing, I just think they have to go for it. My understanding is that can drag on as far as September. The sooner the better with it. But yeah, it'll just be a disaster if they cave and go along with the idea of postponing that somehow in the hope of, finally finding the unicorn Republican senators to do it the bipartisan deal. I just think they have to go with that and get that one done.
Alexander?
Bruce, do you think that the infrastructure framework that I talked about is really just an attempt to get Manchin and Sinema to realize that the Republicans won't play ball?
I like to deal in scenarios, and there certainly is that one. Going back to what my partner Bruce said here in Austria, I used to think that it was 5 Dems and 5 Republicans, but I think there was this period when it sort of percolated up to maybe as many as 21 altogether, or 20, 22 even, with maybe 11 Republicans. But that number is, I think, oscillating quite a bit. And let's take this scenario that, as we're speaking, I bet the leading Democrats and Republicans in that group are on the Sunday talk shows in the United States saying what they think is going to happen tomorrow and on Tuesday. And that's how urgent all of this is. What they say right now is probably going to make or break that deal, because I don't think if there's another vote, as Alexander suggested at the beginning of this week, that there can be another vote after that if it fails on that account. So let's assume that the bipartisan framework caves. Then one claim is that the 3.5 trillion, if you added on the bipartisan framework amount, you go up to about 4.1 or 4.2 trillion. Then in the Democratic caucus, there are some people who say, well, I don't know. I think that could be too much money. Although right now they're on board for the 600, in new spending, the 600 billion of the 1.2 trillion to the bipartisan framework, and for the 3.5 trillion of the reconciliation budget proposal. So if the bipartisan framework caves, and then we're back to looking at Sinema, Manchin, and they're not the only ones, also John Tester and a few others who will start to negotiate based on what they think is best for themselves, their constituents. And I'd like to throw that scenario out if we're left with trying to put everything into the resolution, the reconciliation budget resolution, to try to get that passed, maybe shortening the recess until that gets done. What do you think about the prospects for that? Feel free, anyone, to just chime right in.
Well, I'm hoping the prospects are good. I mean, it's a long shot for the reasons you just said. There's just a lot of things that can go wrong and a lot of pressure points where lobbyists can, if they can peel off just 1 or 2 Democrats, they can take that down too. So I'm always trying to keep in mind it's not over till it's over on that, but I'm determined to be optimistic about that one until it's over. We'll see what happens. But so yeah, I'm going to choose to be optimistic about that one.
I want to sweeten the pot a little bit by also saying we have 2 really, really strong players in this game. And one is the people's lobby, and the number of people who are writing their representatives right now and participating with NGOs in infrastructure, climate mitigation, and climate justice activities, that number keeps increasing all the time. And I think it's encouraging progressives, primarily in the House of Representatives, but also in the Senate, to say, if there's no climate, there's no deal. And that brings me to our second really, really strong ally, and that is reality. And reality is showing us every single day now, and it's not only us, it's showing Joe Manchin, Kirsten Sinema, and everybody. If we don't do something, we're in really, really deep trouble.
As opposed to being
just a
in really
reminder that
trouble.
the science says that it's too late. I mean, I'm not trying to be like, but like that carbon's already in the atmosphere. And so mitigation is what we're all talking about as Democrats, because we believe in science, but the actual practicality of it is that we've got to focus on adaptation at this point.
Well, but Bruce's point is still on. Bruce said really, really deep trouble. So we'll be in really deep trouble
True.
anyway, but
True.
we can avoid being in really, really deep trouble. I think that meme or pictogram that's been going around that shows people saying, there's no climate change. We can fix it. Something. And then the very last one is like, oh. But I take your point, Alexander, for sure. You're complete. The reality is telling.
I'm saying it
telling us
partly
that.
because I don't know if we're focused on the right things. Like we've been focused for so long on like trying to, and like fossil fuel. I get it, right? And methane is terrible. Natural gas, but and we need to stop putting that in the atmosphere. But like when stuff's happening, like has been happening in Canada and whatnot, like we've got to have enough investment to put out the fires and make sure that the water doesn't wash the transportation away.
Right.
Dan Smith wrote that he contacted his representatives in Georgia recently about voter suppression and only got automatic responses. I also wrote to my Republican representative in Central Illinois about the Thrive Act, and I was kind of surprised that I got a full letter back, and it outlined some of the details of the Thrive Act, not pejoratively, but suggesting that they were good components. And I was pleasantly surprised. Of course, the door is always open for this representative to come back and say, oh, it would cost too much. But it seemed as though he was leaving the door open a little bit at this point. And I also want to suggest, although it looks bleak out there, I think if Al Gore were here right now, he might or might not cite NASA numbers. He might cite some other numbers and claim that we're currently at about 1.2 degree increase, and that there's still a chance if we get our act together to come in at about 1.5 degrees. But we could debate that. And if, at any rate, it seems to me that it's still really possible to come in somewhere at between 1.5 and 2 degrees increase. And that gets us into the really or the really, really bad category. But I want just really bad with the opportunity still to turn things around. Also, and I'll throw this into the discussion, there's this aspect of negative carbon calculations that has to do with regenerative agriculture and the possibility that we could, in a fairly short term, in a fairly big way, start taking carbon out of the atmosphere. And as an eternal optimist, I see a lot of potential for us not only to reduce our carbon emissions, but also to take carbon out of the atmosphere. And I think that people like the people that ought to be in charge, as the Thrive Act suggests, that they would be in a good position to move that forward quickly. Could I come back and ask, I'm going to say there is going to be a shortened recess. I think Schumer does have the courage to do that, also in part because he's up for election next year, and he knows that there are progressives looking at him for a possible primary competition. I think also with his collaboration with the president and Senator Sanders, that he's likely going to say, yep, we're going to shorten the recess. We have to get this done. Angela.
Yeah, actually, what I wanted to comment about was the recess, and that throughout the COVID crisis, and anytime there's any sort of crisis, it seems like we're always butting up against a recess. We need to extend the budget, and there's a break that we have to do it before this break. And I don't understand, like, is the calendar is set by the leaders of each house, right?
Yeah, you ought to take a look at that calendar. I've been looking at it somewhat frequently, and the House and Senate are out of session far more than they're in session, which doesn't mean that the representatives aren't working, but that's a big one coming up from about the 9th of August to the 9th of September.
Yeah, that's ridiculous. And I realize that, yeah, they need to have time to go home and be with their constituents, etc. But I don't believe that's what they're doing. Like, I just think they're just taking a vacation. Maybe I'm wrong, but
Well,
I
No,
I think we should
they're
give them-
fundraising. They're fundraising.
Oh, yeah, I
That's
was
what
going to
they're
say the same thing.
Yeah.
I'm sure they're doing some fundraising too.
In the most advanced democracy, sorry, Alexander, to bring this up again, but in the most advanced democracy in the world, give me, yeah, I know you didn't mean it, Alexander. It was just, off the cuff comment, but really, I mean, that's how America sees itself. And it's so, I mean, there's research comparing democracies. It's an oligarchy in many, many ways.
Yeah.
Also, as happened in 2009 with the Affordable Care Act, one of the things that the representatives, let's say senators, are doing are holding virtual town hall meetings. And I saw a headline earlier today that Rand Paul was involved in one yesterday, and that word that Sue mouthed so well a few minutes ago is one that he heard during that town hall meeting. And that I want to keep discussing for a few minutes and then talk about action, because it seems to me that what happens in August, whether the Senate and House are in session or out of session, that it's a month in which we have to be not on vacation. We have to be more intense with our activity, encouraging others to be active, maybe than we ever have been before. Maybe we could segue into that with some of us talking about what we're doing or what we're hearing might happen during the recess.
is something supposed to happen? I know there was a lot of people working on the For the People Act and the John Lewis Act. They wanted to try to get that on the floor before this break. There's so much legislation that needs to be passed. I'm not even sure there's enough time between this break. I mean, just technically, all the things that you have to do to get a bill on the floor, to get people to vote. There's at least 6-7 pieces of legislation that really need to be taken care of. And yeah, I don't know if there's even enough time.
Yesterday, there also were demonstrations in many cities all over the United States for Medicare for all. And I think now, we get involved in the news cycles and are just flooded with information. But I'm trying right now to really maintain focus on some of the things that are most important for me and not to lose track of what's going on. And one potential godsend, but it's really high stakes, is that reconciliation budget proposal, because it's kind of a catch-all right now for so many things that are so important to us. And if we spend even more of our energy than we have in the past, saying that has to get done, and Jamal Bowman's Green Deal for schools has to be in there, and Medicare expansion has to be in there, and the voting rights has to be in there too, then it kind of puts all of those things front and center, with the stakes high, high, high for Manchin and Sinema to say, and others to say, nope, sorry, can't do it.
I have a question, like it's just a general question. I've been working on trying to get people to contact their senators about the For the People Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Act recently. And I noticed that there were a lot of Democratic senators that weren't 100% on board. They weren't that on board with getting rid of the filibuster. What do we do about these people that are just trying to, you know, we have the power, we have a trifecta. Why don't they want to use their power to do something? Don't all answer at once.
Well, it's tough. It's tough when the president isn't willing to let go of the filibuster either, right? He still hasn't said that he's comfortable moving on. Is that current? I mean, that's the last I think
That's
I
right.
heard.
He's a lion of the Senate, and he thought that rule was great back when he was not very good on civil rights and everything. And now he wants to just be quiet about it.
I mean, there was a
Yeah.
session on the filibuster that the Solidarity Sundays group put together, which was interesting. And I guess people are still using the argument that if they get rid of the filibuster, it'll be used against us when the Republicans are back in power. Like, is that the main? I mean, that's the only argument I can recall that seemed to have that
Yeah,
people
but
were
if
using.
they get back in power, they're just going to steamroller everything that they want.
yeah.
It doesn't matter. You know, you're not going to have people on their side going, oh, I don't know if we should hurt people. Let's
Right.
just go ahead and do it. You know,
And-
like they won't stop to have
Right,
any
and
consideration.
right.
The
And if
only
we-
way they get back in power
If we
is
don't do
if
anything.
they are able to go forward with their redistricting plans. The only way we can stop that is if we use our power now. And
Right.
they will never get back in power after we use our power, because
Right.
they're a minority. They're a huge minority.
And you know, Bruce's response from his rep says a lot. Like, his rep knows. I don't think your rep is open to those ideas, Bruce. I think your rep knows that his constituents believe in those things and want to see those things. And he can't be on paper being against, you know, all the you know, the things in the Thrive Act. And so where was I going with this? I totally lost my frame of that if we don't, that if the Democrats enact, like Alexander was saying, like if the Democrats enact things, you know, that help people, essentially make life better for people, give people a chance, make things more fair, then you know, why would anyone vote for Republicans?
Alexander was talking earlier about messaging too, and on the one hand, I get frustrated now because I feel like we don't have enough time for messaging. We have to just say, get it done. But when we are messaging, it seems to me also really effective is pointing out what Sue just did with some of those great graphs indicating the bipartisan people's support for so much of what we're talking about. My representative's name is Rodney Davis. He also is someone who could go on that January 6th commission from the Republican side. And when he has to get elected, you know, every 2 years, and he's down to about 3%, 2% margin of victory when he gets elected now. And that's another really important thing to keep in mind. He knows that he has to be careful right now. And it seems to me the people's lobby has to point to the bipartisan support for so much of what we're talking about and demand that those Republicans meet our needs or sayonara. I want to go to the action, the last slide today, and I'm going to share my screen again, I hope. Can you see the action options?
Yep, we can see them.
All right, here are a couple options in 3 categories. First of all, our own DNC, Environmental and Climate Crisis Council, is featuring its own letter writing to our congressional leaders right now, encouraging our congressional leaders to end fossil fuel subsidies. And that is a Democratic National Committee action. The second one is Climate Reality Project. That's the Al Gore project. And they also have a letter writing campaign. They do everything. And this is one that encourages our congressional leaders to go big on climate right now. Then if we're thinking about the midterm elections and we want to look at progressive candidates, the Sunrise Movement has a fairly short list of candidates they endorse right now. You might want to look at that and think about who you want to support as we get into the midterm season. And then the NGO activity is going at a high speed right now. The Sierra Club on Tuesday has its own kickoff for the Summer of Collective Action. And all of these are links, by the way. And I'm going to make sure that everyone has this presentation in our Facebook page of the Progressive Democrats Abroad tomorrow. And if you just go to the Sierra Club right away, you'll see that you can sign in there and get ready to be active with them with their joint power during the August, whatever it is, recess or not recess. And then the National Nurses United Medicare for All group is really focused on the August recess with a variety of actions that they want to take. Sue has recommended that we feature one of these actions in the proDA Facebook page every day this week. And I think that's a great idea. And I want to volunteer to do that. And finally, save the date. I think that our next progress report, number 7, it could be in the middle of the August recess. It may be that the House and Senate won't be on recess and they'll still be working. And it will be another great opportunity for us to check in to see how successful we've been with our action and to see how successful the House and Senate have been in moving things forward with infrastructure as the temperature rises, the rains fall, and we all get more and more concerned about what's going to happen. Would anybody like to sign in with a last word or comment or maybe even a final question?
I want to thank you, Bruce, for organizing these, and thank Alexander and Angela and you for the presentations and the work. And I know there's other volunteers who have done presentations at previous sessions of the progress reports. I'm so glad this one's recorded because not everybody who RSVP was able to be here. Yeah, I just really appreciate these this series.
I'd also like to ask Alexander and Angela if they would like to say something about the Democrats Abroad climate crew and the work it's doing.
Oh, Alexander, go for it. You're the boss. I'm just a a
well,
worker.
there are 3 or 4 bosses, and I think you're one of them. But Yeah, so Naomi and Dash and I work sort of together, and Angela is doing the communications piece now, which is really important. We've got about 5 working groups that will be underneath what we hope will be approved in late September by the Executive Committee of Democrats Abroad. We're working on the terms of reference, which is akin to a set of bylaws, and a number of other documents that are must-have or supposed to have. Those 5 working groups are things like maybe of particular interest to this group, the watchdogs who will be watchdogging the UN and watchdogging legislation and watchdogging Congress and the courts to the extent that we can build a really big group. And then that will feed into a policy and events committee. And they'll work with communications we'll have hopefully a real communications plan for what we're going to be doing. There's just so much to talk about. And then there'll be a stewardship committee that we were told today is going to need to develop some actual goals for DA if we want to pursue that in terms of greening our walking the walk and talking the talk. But that group will also service Americans who might be climate refugees abroad or are in difficult situations because of flooding or natural disasters while they're living abroad. And then there's another group that will be doing voter outreach, and not Naomi Klein. I used Naomi Klein's picture yesterday, but Naomi Ages in Norway will be leading that. And we're really excited to work with Heidi Birch and the effective folks who work on voter outreach in Democrats Abroad.
All right, that is the Democrats Abroad Environmental and Climate Crisis Council, which mirrors our own DNC council of the same name. And that DNC council inspires this work. And I think it's really exciting listening to those working groups. And in addition to all of the other ones mentioned, that group that is working on stewardship and making sure that our Democrats Abroad is as green as it possibly can be in all aspects of its work. That, I think, is really exciting. Well, I want to thank all of you too for participating today. Thank our presenters specifically. And let's see what happens now. And let's not only watch, but participate. So what we think ought to happen really does happen. Bruce.
Yeah, one quick question. Where will the recording be available? Are you going to put a link on the website of this session, I mean?
It will be in the Progressive Democrats Abroad Facebook page at the top of the page tomorrow.
Okay, great. Thank you.
All right, I'm going to stop the recording at this point.